Okay, so first of all, I want to thank Samuel Zinner for this very strong engagement with what I think is a very complicated topic. Elder the Grand Richards, an apostle of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, from 1952 to 1983, famously wrote in his book, A Marvelous Work and a Wonder, "Had all the Bibles in the world been destroyed, the doctrines and teachings of the church would have been found to conform to Bible teachings, since they were received by direct revelation from God. We appeal to the Bible to prove that the truths received through the restoration of the gospel are in accord with its teachings." So this quote from Elder Richards embodies a view of the scriptures as essentially a repository of information, doctrines and teachings, and it prioritizes modern revelation as the ultimate source of these things for Latter-day Saints. From a traditional Jewish standpoint, and from the standpoint of many Christian churches, this statement is horrifying. Elder Richards is basically saying that we are not people of the book. We are not a Bible-based church or a tradition-based church, but are based on modern revelation from a living Christ. Turning now to Dr. Zinner's talk, I find his insights both fascinating and timely. According to Zinner, just as the cella of the temple is the geographical sacred center of the world, and the Sabbath is the chronological sacred center, the Torah within the Hebrew Bible is a textual sacred center, housing the divine name or tetragrammaton. We even have a tripartite structure of Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim, with the Eden narrative guarded by cherubim at the beginning, reflecting the tripartite architecture of the temple. I love Zinner's statement, referencing certain texts in Job, Ben Sira, and Baruch, that the Lady Wisdom, is not thereby, or by being equated with the Torah, a written text, not just transmitted orally, that she is not thereby demythologized, but remythologized for the age of the exile. Dr. Zinner marshals examples of number symbolism and encryptions in the Hebrew Bible to show how intricate the enshrinement of the divine name is. He gets down to the level of the individual letters. To continue the correlation with sacred geography, this is like going to the level of the stones and blocks of the temple. What is striking in comparison to the Grand Richards approach is its uncompromising textuality. Every letter is important. This reminds me of the Muslim approach to the Quran. It is an Arabic Quran. Similarly, we have here an essentially Hebrew Torah, one that really can't be translated without losing some of the sacred significance. And the text itself is sacred, almost like a divine image in itself. And I think it is useful to point out that the correlation of text and temple can also work in other ways. So in this very conference, later on we'll hear in the paper by Jeff Bradshaw and Matt Bowen, so they approach the narrative of Jacob in Genesis, or we'll hear this, as a kind of textual ritual. To read the text is to follow or virtually participate in the ritual. This is an approach seen in many other studies that I've seen or heard in academic publications and presentations. The Book of Mormon encourages an approach to the scriptures as a launch pad to revelation. So we get this, for example, with Moroni. When ye shall read these things, ask God. And Moroni is trying to kind of give us our own experience with the divine through the text, not in the text, but from the text to another experience. It becomes a place of prayer that can lead us to our own experience with the divine, just as the temple is a house of prayer. These approaches are timely, I think, because we live in a time when the study of the scriptures competes with sophisticated enticements for our airtime and our desk space So I don't know if any of you know, like I do, families in which all it takes is to say the words, "and it came to pass," and all of a sudden, all the children in the room will disappear and seek refuge with their screens. So it's a time when it's becoming increasingly hard to defend the relevance of the scriptures. So now, more than ever before, we need a sacred center where our minds can dwell. So once again, I want to thank Dr. Zinner for that wonderful presentation.
Thank you, David. Very gracious.
We have some questions, and as I understand it, I'm going to speak and then I will be silent so we can hear from Dr. Zinner. So first question that came in, this is a basic question. Why was the encryption of the divine name in the Psalms important to their authors? Is it because the temple is where his name dwells?
I think that's a valid point, but I think there's some more primary observation. Saussure, in his anagram theory, which I briefly mentioned, he suspected that encrypted names in ancient literature in general, and he was basically dealing with the Greco-Roman literature, that these encryptions could have served a ritual or a praxis. And I think that makes a lot of sense. If we look especially at the Tehillim, if we see divine names, not only the Tetragrammaton, but in general, if we see divine names placed in the text according to various divine names, numerical values, it may have been, I can't know, but my suspicion is that the thinking may have been that when one then praised the text, not only is the spiritual potency of those divine names released when saying them, but also by virtue of their placements, right? So there is another esoteric level, right, where the potency of the same divine names is released on a double level, right? So it may have been important for those types of ritual reasons, right? And one recalls the idea in various cultures that if you know someone's name, then you have control over that name. Well, here the scribes and composers would know the numerical values of the divine names, and by placing them in the text according to numerical values, the thinking may have been that this is the way we get a double release, right, or a release of the potency of the divine names on a double level, exoteric and esoteric.
Response. Another basic question that came in, and I think this is along very similar lines. What temple significance might the encryption of the name Joshua in some of the Psalms, alluding to bringing the children of Israel into the promised land, have had for ancient authors and readers?
Just on a most general level, I think it would have been that Joshua leads the children of Israel into the promised land where the temple will be built, right? And so the temple then instantiates the Tetragrammaton, or in other words, the Tetragrammaton or the Lord dwells in that temple. So I think it's a role of leadership, bringing the children of Israel into the promised land where the temple will be constructed.
Okay, wonderful. And how are we on time? Do we have time for another couple questions? Because I have some as well. Okay, great. Here's a question from me. I think some people hearing this may want to know if we were to want to learn more about these techniques of number symbolism that you've used in your presentation, like acrostics, anagrams, isopsephy. etc. Is there a good source to go to? Is there like a reliable manual on the subject?
Reliable manual. Well, almost all of the examples I offered were my own discoveries. So I don't think there's a manual by others, right? Though the structure of Psalm 23, that was not my discovery. The Joshua encryption was, but that it's built out of 26 plus 3 plus 26 letters, that's well known in the critical literature. But if one wants to see a certain amount of research, of my own research, you can go to my academia.edu page. So you just do a Google search, academia.edu, Samuel Zinner, and I have several pieces up there.
Wonderful. So I hope you'll see many hits on your on the academia.edu page soon. Thank you. And just one more question. So historically, Judaism has had textual correlates of the temple for a long time, and as your paper argues, even into pre-exilic times. But Jewish people have retained a hope for the return of the physical temple. So the question would be, do having textual correlates of the temple affect in any way the need for a physical temple? And if there's still a need for the physical temple, why? Why is there still a hope for the return of the physical building?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that, that's a large question, right? It's a quote unquote theological question, right, for Judaism. But as you know, with the destruction of the Second Temple, right, the rabbinic authorities developed the trope that basically the daily prayers, which eventually were codified in the Siddur, that these daily prayers were an efficacious substitute, right, for the temple. So it makes up for the lack of the temple. But at the same time, always there has been the prayer in the Siddur for the speedy rebuilding of the temple in our days, right? So hasten, right? So the two, have always been compatible, and the rebuilding of the temple also is bound up, as you know, with the hope, right, for the coming of the Messiah or the Mashiach. So they go hand in hand, right? So this is a very intricate, and it's actually a difficult question conceptually when we then go beyond rabbinic teaching, and then when you get into the realm of more esoteric teachings in Judaism, such as Kabbalah, right? Because there we encounter ideas, right? For instance, perpetuated by Avraham Abulafia, one of the greatest traditional Kabbalistic authorities, that each person, right, who obtains a Kabbalistic prophetic consciousness, right, attains the rank of the Messiah, right? And so does that mean that we give up the hope for a future Messiah, right? According to the literal descriptions of the Nevi'im, the prophets, not necessarily, but it's a very difficult question. And in Judaism, just as I believe in Christian sources, you can also have the idea of a spiritualized temple, right? So the temple then becomes a symbol. But in general, I think from a Jewish perspective, the reading of the Torah and the saying of the prayers that sustains us and actually sort of instantiates the temple in a textual and invocatory mode, right, is our it's our spiritual food, and we cultivate the hope, right, for the rebuilding of the temple. So we don't see any incompatibility there. So one could see sort of a return, right? So you have the physical temple, which then, right, is instantiated in a textual and a prayerful mode, and then, right, this is the bridge to the future messianic temple. But much more could be said, of course. But thank you, David, for your questions. It's a very enriching ecumenical event. So thank you all.